Part 33. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 327. The bandaged man stood there stunned, looking at the bloody face outside the car window, motionless. Subai took a cigarette in his hand and twirled it around, then as if he had made up his mind, he crushed the cigarette into pieces, stood up, stood in front of the bandaged man, and shouted. "What name did he say? Tell me." After Subai made this move, the bloody corpse passed directly through the car window and walked into the hearse. There was a dangerous aura wafting around the bloody corpse. This was a warning. It means I didn't kill you before. But if you dare to continue asking, you will be dead. This is a death threat. A name that cannot be said. Terrorist Radio wants to know his identity, and many listeners who are related to Jixiang and were sent here also want to know his identity. At this moment, due to the coincidence of a bottle of mineral water, Subai was so close to this name and this answer. As long as you know the name and shout it loudly, that's it. This damn real mission can be considered over. Tell me the name. Subai's body began to turn into a zombie, and a zombie exuding a strong evil aura appeared in the hearse. Subai had had enough of this damn real task. The two big guys were playing riddles, and his little role was involved. Come in, now, and end this process. I don't care if you have a deep connection with Jixiang, I don't care what your purpose is, I don't care how powerful you are, you can kill all the high-level listeners in Shaanxi. I've had enough. I'm tired of it. If you were Lichi, I would rather help you keep the secret, and even try my best to help as much as I can. But if you have that thing, it is obviously not Lichi, so I'm sorry. I'm afraid of him, the bandage man said. Why are you afraid of him? Subai shouted. I'm afraid he will kill me. You're already dead. What are you afraid of? That's right, I'm already dead. I'm going to be sent to the crematorium to be cremated. Haha, what am I afraid of? Subai. The name he called was Yezi. The bandage man said the name. Subai frowned, damn it, Yezi. Leaf. Coconut? Yezi. No matter what, it sounds like a woman's name. The entire hearse was covered with a layer of blood clots at this time, as if it had been sprayed with a thick layer of red paint. This was a barrier, a wall, and the bloody corpse was done very slowly. Suddenly, a strange light flashed in Subai's eyes. Yezi is not your name, because a person rarely says his name even if he is talking in his sleep. It should be someone very important to you, it should be your lover, or even your wife. You are a strong listener and a very scary existence. This is your mysterious place, but it is also the place where you are rare. With your wife's name, you can quickly search for your true identity, because no matter in the past or now, I believe that listeners at your level are an absolute minority and easy to check. Subai observed the surrounding environment as he spoke. He could feel that he was isolated. In fact, when the bandaged man was about to say this name, what the blood corpse was doing was not to kill Subai, but to kill him. To isolate Subai, he must have some restrictions, or some fear, and cannot kill the listeners specially selected and sent to Xi'an for these terrorist broadcasts, but he cannot let Subai pass on this news, even if Subai stood on the street and shouted, and the terror radio could hear it. Even if any listener related to the matter said the name, the terror radio would know it instantly. Because terrorist broadcasts also have their own limitations in this real world. Its ears, its eyes, its power, and its authority are not done by oneself, but through each person. In the real world, listeners listen to its instructions and help him complete tasks. Even if the bandage man keeps shouting that name, as long as there is no audience around him to hear it, or in other words, no audience related to the magnet hears and repeats the name, it is meaningless. The bloody corpse walked towards Subai step by step. The hearse had been transformed into a cage by him. Some vague shadows could be seen from the window. The car was no longer on the road heading towards the crematorium. The surroundings were dark. No light can shine through, as if it was buried deep underground. There was a light in the hearse, but now it looked very miserable under the light. Subai stood there and did not take the initiative to attack the blood corpse, because his body was completely restrained, as if a body holding technique had been used, and he was completely unable to move. The body of the bloody corpse was trembling, as if a person had encountered something very funny, and he was laughing, very happily. However, there is no skin on the blood corpse, so it cannot express the form and meaning of laughing. Subai knew clearly that he was mocking himself and mocking his own overestimation. This is a high-end game, not a place where small chess pieces can jump around. This is the meaning expressed by the blood corpse. You know the important information related to my identity, but you can't convey it. If it doesn't know, it will be of no use. Subai closed his eyes, and his body turned into a blood mist at this time. However, the blood corpse just stretched out a finger, and the blood mist condensed in an instant, and changed back to Subai's appearance. All the struggles were in vain. The body of the bloody corpse stopped shaking. He passed by Subai and did not kill Subai. Instead, he came to the man with the bandage. The man with the bandage thought it was nothing at first. He was already a dead man. And he didn't say that he wanted to stay in the world and be a ghost forever. He wanted to cremate himself, to end himself, to reincarnate, to end this life, to end it completely, because there are no worries, so there is nothing to fear. However, a blood corpse is a blood corpse after all. Subai clearly remembered the scene of a Shaanxi audience standing in the number 1 pit of the terracotta warriors and horses, their blood drained and standing there, and he also knew how terrifying it was. The bandaged man's body slowly melted away at this time. This was a corpse, and his soul gradually became distorted, and finally, disappeared into thin air. Subai gritted his teeth tightly, unable to move his body, but the fire of anger in his heart was almost uncontrollable. Yes, in the previous conversation, Subai told the bandaged man that you are dead, so what are you afraid of? In fact, Subai concealed one thing, that is, for listeners like them, even if you die and become a ghost, it can still make your soul fly away, make you worse than reincarnation, and make you disappear like ashes. All the high-level listeners in Shaanxi were dead. This would not make Subai angry, because Subai had no relationship with those people and did not know them. But this bandage man, the one who asked him to help pick up soap and asked him to help pour water. The guy was so stunned that Subai felt a great anger and dissatisfaction. If it hadn't met him on the way to the crematorium, if he hadn't regarded himself as his last friend, if it hadn't been for the bottle of mineral water, he might not have stopped or invited himself into the car for the last time. Narrate. All of this is actually because of myself. It was me who killed him. The hospital service station in the afternoon gives people a drowsy feeling. After all, the nurses in the service station are also human beings. After a busy morning, they also want to take a nap to rest. A little laziness is also a human being. Common sense. Sissy, wake up. The director is coming to check on you later. If he sees you dozing off, he will scold you again. Ah, Sister Yun, I really fell asleep. I'm sorry, I was making patient case records. One patient left suddenly. I don't know what happened. Fortunately, there is a phone number of his family member on his hospitalization record. I was just going to call and ask. Oh, you were secretly discharged from the hospital again because you owed medical bills. No, Sister Yun. This patient still has a lot of money in his card. He can't have escaped, but he is indeed gone now. By the way, Sister Yun, it seems that I haven't seen you for a while. You go, where is it? I'm feeling a little unwell. I'm hospitalized. I'm in the inpatient department in the front building. I'm sorry, Sister Yun. I didn't know, and I didn't seem to visit you. It's my fault to blame me. Sister Yun, you usually take good care of me. It's okay. You are also very busy. Let me tell you, sister, I met a very interesting patient when I was in the hospital. This patient would call someone's name many times every night. Ah, there's still this thing. Are you talking in your sleep? Well, that should be it. Her name is Yezi. Coconut? What a strange name. That's not it. I think it should be called Yezi. Sisi took a pen and started writing on the list in her hand, leaves of leaves. Yes, pretty. Yezi. Sisi confusedly wrote the word Yezi in front of the name Zhongbei in the family column on the record sheet. However, when she was about to pick up the list and find the person standing there, when Sister Yun across from me went to ask if the writing was correct, she suddenly found that Sister Yun was missing. Hey, where's Sister Yun? The next moment, the little nurse named Sisi immediately covered her mouth in shock. Didn't Sister Yun accidentally fall down and hit her head while walking down the stairs last week and died? Now her family is arguing with the hospital for compensation. So the body is still stored in the morgue and has not been processed. Sisi sat down a little distracted, forcing herself to believe that it was just an illusion before, but she was subconsciously used to the feeling of Sister Yun around her. She wants to do something. Right. You have to work, you have to forget everything that happened before, yes, forget everything. Immediately, Sisi picked up the phone at the service station with trembling hands, and dialed the number saved in the relative column of the patient information sheet in her hand called Subai. Sisi had called this number before. The patient named Subai couldn't get through no matter how hard he tried. Hey, what's going on? The fat man's voice came from the other end of the phone. Hey, I said you, a monk, are not vegetarians. Why are you trying to grab duck intestines from me? Leave some for me. Sisi frowned and looked at the names on the family list. It said Yezi and Zhongbei. Sisi was still a little confused at this time and asked directly into the phone. I'm looking for Miss Yezi. We have a patient here named Subai, and he's missing. Hey, Yezi. Subai. I know Subai. Who is Yezi? Yezi, Zzz, is this her phone number? Yezi, Zissezi, Yezi. Who is it? The fat man who was eating hot pot read out the name Yezi. Suddenly, a gust of wind suddenly blew. The monk and Gyatso put down their chopsticks subconsciously. The fat man was also a little suspicious and looked around. All three of them felt it. Just now, something seemed to happen. Happened. Terror broadcast. Author, Chunji Disyao. Chapter 328. Perhaps, it was a gap-like difference that created the current situation. Even though Subai switched to zombie state, he still couldn't move at all. This deep feeling of powerlessness was felt from the first day he arrived in Xi'an, and it has been with him since then, suppressing Subai's heart, making him I can't even breathe smoothly. The blood corpse turned around and seemed to be planning to leave. His body was slowly becoming unreal. He probably had other things to do. From Yu Subai's perspective, the blood corpse was dancing on the tip of the knife, and in the horror broadcast game, if it was from a local perspective or someone who had nothing to do with him, Subai might have praised him, but the bandaged man just disappeared in front of his eyes. Due to emotions and reasons, Subai Baidu would not have such emotions. In fact, Subai didn't know the reason why the blood corpse appeared, nor did he know the reason why the blood corpse continued to stay here. But there was one thing Subai knew very well, that is, he was completely isolated now. In the small space of the hearse, the message could not be transmitted, and the mobile phone signal was definitely not available. Then, he could not do anything to the blood corpse. Even the blood corpse had some scruples about killing him, but Subai actually felt more depressed, Obviously it's really frustrating to have a key in your hand, but you can't open the door. Perhaps, the Frankenstein monster who shot the black man in the head 3 times with a pistol was just a special case. Generally, his arms could not reach his thighs. However, just when the blood corpse was about to disappear and leave here, a white light suddenly enveloped the blood corpse. There is a small speaker in the hearse, which is used to play sad music, because when the hearse is used to transport corpses, there will be accompanying family members in the car. At that time, the sad music needs to be heard in the hearse, similar to After All, there are only a few people like the bandaged man who are dragged away to be burned alone. The speaker made bursts of friction sound, which was a bit harsh and blurry, as if a person was debugging a new microphone, just saying hey, hello, hello. Sudbai's eyes were full of shock. He was very familiar with this white light. It was the white light that used to transport people into the world of stories every time the horror broadcast took place. Terror broadcast, did you finally know the identity of the bloody corpse through other channels? Dear listeners, welcome to the Horror Radio Show. I am the host of the show. I don't have a name because names have no meaning here. Today, I am going to tell you a short story here, similar to Aesop's fables or Grimm's fairy tales. There is a farmer who is very hard working. He works hard every day, so the vegetables in his vegetable field grow very well. This farmer has always cherished these precious vegetables. Of course, he is not doting on them. When he meets, he will deal with the sick vegetables or the vegetables that are planted too densely and start to compete with each other for nutrients. He will pull out some vegetables and eliminate some vegetables. The purpose is to make the entire vegetable garden better. There is, however, a man, no, rather, he should be called a thief. One day, this thief came to the vegetable garden. He disguised his identity and wrapped himself in blood-red silk cloth, so that no one could tell who he was. He went to the farmer's vegetable field, stole the farmer's vegetables, and destroyed them. Went to a large vegetable garden. This scene was discovered by the farmer. Judging from his body shape, the farmer was able to guess the age of the thief. Children of this age in the town would receive fresh vegetables from farmers at home when they were young, so the thief must also be eating from the farmer. Vegetables grew up. The farmer has his own standards and rules. He is a very rigid person. It is precisely because of this that he can gain the respect of most people in the town as a vegetable farmer. The farmer is unwilling to wrong any good person, so even if he has a shotgun or a machete, he cannot use it without knowing the specific identity of the thief. This is the farmer's creed. He will not destroy it, even if the thief continues to commit crimes every day without restraint. People come to steal vegetables at night, but the farmer still suppresses the anger in his heart and remains indifferent. Finally, one day, the farmer knew the identity of the thief. So, the farmer is about to take action. The reason why he takes action is not because the farmer feels sorry for the destroyed vegetable field. After all, vegetables can be sown and will grow again soon. However, the farmer has discovered that because this thief's exemplary role has caused many people in the town who pass by his vegetable garden during the day to have a look of eagerness and greed in their eyes. Therefore, the thief must be punished, otherwise the vegetable garden will not be saved at all. However, the farmer could not hide his kind-hearted nature. He did not intend to punish the thief with a shotgun and machete. After all, the thief grew up eating the vegetables he grew, and the farmer watched him grow up every day. So, reasonably, the farmer also had a different feeling towards the thief. Therefore, the farmer decided to forgive the thief. He buried the thief in the ground and let the thief's body nourish the vegetable field. In the future, the nutrients and essence of the thief will give birth to a better growing vegetable field. In the farmer's opinion, the thief's body will nourish the vegetable field. The thief should also have received a kind of sublimation and a kind of inheritance. Listeners, do you think the farmer is too kind? The sound of the horror radio continued to sound, telling the story at a constant speed, while on the other side, the blood corpse began to struggle and roar. Sudbai could feel the dissatisfaction and anger coming from the blood corpse. But Terror Broadcast already knows his identity, so it can start the next step, which is to send the blood corpse into the story world. In the real world, Terror Broadcast has many restrictions, but in the story world, Terror Broadcast it is much more free and convenient. It has 1,000 and 10,000 ways to punish the bloody corpses, ruining the audience structure of the entire Shaanxi land. It is equivalent to digging out the private vegetable garden of horror broadcasting. A big chunk went away, and one can imagine the anger of the horror broadcast. Not long ago, Sudbai's struggle in front of the blood corpse seemed so pale and feeble, but the situation changed too quickly. When the horror broadcast learned the true identity of the blood corpse, it directly forcibly dragged him into the story world. Likewise, in front of the terrifying broadcast, the bloody corpse also looked a little pale and weak, just like Sudbai before. The bloody corpse disappeared, and all the restrictions disappeared with it. The zombie blood on Sudbai's body disappeared, and he sat on the ground as if he had lost all strength. In an instant, the scenery of the street also appeared outside the window of the hearse. However, the body that was originally going to be transported by the hearse had been completely annihilated at this time, including his soul, which was completely gone. Really, it's like having a nightmare, Sudbai murmured to himself, then reached out and picked up a small piece of bandage from the freezer. This was the remnant of the bandage man when he was lying in the freezer. Everything else could not be found. In front of the bloody corpse, the bandaged man completely evaporated. The wind in early winter, with its dryness and desolation, is more inhumane than the autumn wind. In the cemetery park, Sudbai stood in front of a tombstone, holding a bouquet of flowers and a backpack. The photo on the tombstone is of a thin-faced man who is about 50 years old. Generally, there are photos of people smiling on tombstones, and this one is no exception. The man is smiling heartily, just because there is only one face captured. So we can't guess what happy event he was happy about. Sudbai placed the bouquet in front of the tombstone, and then sat down. The bandage man's wife and daughter did not come back from the United States, but entrusted a relative to help with the funeral arrangements. After receiving the money, the relative just signed from the hospital and sent the person to the crematorium to settle the matter. In the past, when the bandage man was famous, how far was it? His relatives will also come to him, but now everyone knows that this guy failed to make a comeback after giving all his assets to his wife and daughter who immigrated abroad. Now he is just a destitute ghost, and his parents have long passed away. So we couldn't even hold a funeral, and we couldn't even cook a fast meal. It can't be said that it's not cold, it can't be said that it's not down and out. In the end, when the crematorium discovered that the body was gone, they didn't tell the relative who helped with the matter. Instead, they pulled some ashes from someone who had just burned them, put them in an urn, signed the form, and handed it over. In the past, the relative would just put the urn under the tombstone that had been ordered before and the matter was settled. There is a tombstone of the bandaged man and a photo of the bandaged man, but the ashes underneath do not know which passerby they came from. Sudbai patted the tombstone with his hand. He wanted to look serious, but he didn't know why he wanted to laugh. "Brother, I won't burn useless things like paper money for you. I'll loosen the soil for you." Sudbai took out 2 bottles of mineral water from his bag and poured them all on the ground. Just as he was putting away the mineral water bottles, Sudbai's cell phone rang. At the same time, Sudbai's chest suddenly hurt, and he immediately fell to his knees on the ground, sweating profusely, with a look of pain on his face. After a while, this painful feeling finally disappeared. Sudbai, who already knew what happened, took out his mobile phone and called. Broadcast announcement: enter the next story world in 1 week. Story world name: Tomb of the Bloody Corpse. Number of participants: unknown. The rest, unknown. Looking at the message on the phone screen, Subai licked his lips, then nodded thoughtfully. This time, I can truly feel the preferential treatment given by horror radio to listeners who complete real-life tasks. At the same time, I seem to have a better understanding of the true meaning of the story told by horror radio when it forcibly pulls the blood corpse into the story world. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Disyao. Chapter 329. This time the story world was notified 1 week in advance, which is pretty good. At least you don't have to worry about accidentally entering the story world while eating or lying in bed without any precautions. Subai still remembered that the last time he, the monk and Gyatso took off their clothes to soak in the hot springs in Josegu Paradise International Hotel, and entered the story world, so that the three of them didn't even have a single piece of clothing on them and had to go and be hummed. It would be really embarrassing to find makeshift clothes from dead people in a slaughtered village. Moreover, from the title of the story and the story told by the horror broadcast when collecting the blood corpses, it can be seen that the story world that he is about to enter will be based on the theme of blood corpses. It is very likely that this blood corpse will be terrorized. After the broadcast was thrown into a story world and punished with torture or even death, the horror broadcast also took the opportunity to design a story world so that listeners could go in and experience the adventure of life and death while acquiring the inheritance of the blood corpse. This is probably the meaning of the farmer's story about burying the thief in the soil and letting him nourish a new batch of vegetables. This is really a kind of inheritance forcibly created by terrorist broadcasts using bloody means. Bloody the corpse was originally a vegetable cultivated by terrorist broadcasting, but it turned out to be disobedient, so terrorist broadcasting used it as fertilizer. As for Subai, although he hasn't entered the story world yet, he has almost figured out the main goal of the next story world, and can roughly guess that the next story world should be a kind of supernatural world that is deeply related to zombies. Relationship, there may even be space problems. After all, Subai has also experienced the blood corpse's ability to control the spatial pattern, so it is very likely that the next story world will have this. With so much important information, this is the most polite Subai has ever seen before entering the story world. It is equivalent to the horror broadcast telling you how much oil there is in this land. Hurry up and spend money to take pictures and make a fortune. It's not that Subai has never done real-life missions before, and he has indeed received care from some horror broadcasts in the real world, but that kind of care is just meaning. This time the horror broadcast is full of sincerity, which is equivalent to Subai was a little flattered by giving himself half the green light. Of course, according to the farmer's story on the horror broadcast, Subai himself was considered a more obedient vegetable in the garden. The farmer was happy and specially scooped a pot of manure for Subai to fertilize as a reward. As soon as he thought about this, Subai suddenly felt that there was no sense of beauty at all. There were indeed no blood corpses here in Xi'an, and the atmosphere that was unfriendly to the audience was no longer there. However, the terrifying broadcast above his head still continued to exist unchanged. But maybe the listeners are already somewhat accustomed to horror broadcasts, and they don't think it's anything. It's like the feeling that the sky has always existed and the earth has always existed. Looking at the photo on the tombstone of the bandaged man, Subai was slightly in a trance. The relationship between the two people was actually very ordinary, nothing more than the fate forged by a bottle of mineral water, but both parties were a little bit sincere to each other. In fact, this is how it is between people. Maybe he is used to the intrigues with other listeners. Now Subai doesn't trust Chu Zhao 100%, so suddenly a stranger comes and actually meets by chance. The light friendship, well, or called a strange ghost, makes me a little uncomfortable, and I feel a little sad from the bottom of my heart. After a long time, Sudbai left the cemetery. He still had a week to spend at his own disposal. The real task was over, and there was no need for him to stick to Xian. For a while, he felt like the sky was high and the birds could fly in the sea and the fish could jump. Sudbai planned to use this week to return to Shanghai first, and then go to Frankenstein's house to see if he could find out anything unexpected about the house card that the boy in red specially sent to him. He never had the time or energy to go there. Now I have time and energy. Although the boy in red was patted away by Jixiang's paws, it is always a waste to leave that place there, and Sudbai is also worried that it will really be damaged after a long time. Sudbai still understood that no matter what accident or good thing happened, he could not stay there forever and wait for him wholeheartedly. He took out his mobile phone and checked. What surprised Sudbai was that the earliest flight to Shanghai was tomorrow night. The reason may be due to military air traffic control, which meant that Sudbai still had more than one day to stay in Xi'an. But my current mood is incomparable with my previous mood. Now, I finally feel like a tourist. Sudbai first went to a clothing store to buy a new set of clothes, and then started walking casually in Xi'an City. Wearing a new windbreaker, a new pair of boots, and a peaked cap on his head, Sudbai's handsome face was hidden in the clothes, making him look very low-key. Walking on the wall of the ancient city of Xi'an, one feels like a lonely passerby. The passage of time is recorded on the surrounding wall stacks, and Sudbai, for this city wall, may be just a small fragment of the passing time. Not far away, a young girl passed by Sudbai on a bicycle. Sudbai lowered his head and continued walking in silence. He also looked at the scenery, but he didn't look at it very seriously, as if he was paying attention to the surrounding scenery. Everything is so careless. The girl stopped behind Sudbai, picked up the camera hanging on her chest and ran after her. "Excuse me, sir, sir." Sudbai stopped, raised his head slightly, and looked at the girl. The girl has a fair complexion and a youthful and beautiful look. Her long flowing hair makes her look like a fresh and refined girl next door. Judging by her age, she should still be in college. In fact, Sudbai should be considered a college student now. If it weren't for the horror broadcast that caused Sudbai's life trajectory to completely deviate, he would be preparing for his graduation project in school now. Sudbai didn't speak, just looked at the girl with his eyes. "Sir, can I take a photo of you?" the girl said her request. "I think your back is very lonely, and when combined with this ancient city wall, it makes a picture." A girl who still maintains a simple pursuit of literary and artistic atmosphere. Sudbai nodded slightly, indicating his permission. The girl happily stepped away with the camera. It seemed that she was a relatively professional amateur photographer, but she was embarrassed to ask Sudbai to pose for her. But as soon as Sudbai stood there, it gave her a very satisfying and natural feeling. This is experience, this is vicissitudes of life, this is story. A man's maturity is by no means the accumulation of age, but the accumulation of ups and downs in his life. Sudbai's life as an audience this year has changed Sudbai's temperament drastically. Of course, even if not being an audience member, Sudbai's temperament from a child to a wealthy family would not be much worse. "Thank you for your cooperation." The girl only met Sudbai once. After thanking Sudbai, she rode her bicycle along the bumpy road on the city wall. This kind of bicycle can be rented for money at the Xi'an Ancient City Wall attraction. Many tourists like to rent a bicycle and ride along the ancient city wall. Sudbai continued walking, feeling that the sun was beginning to turn yellow and then set. Fatty and the others are popular for spicy food in Chongqing. Although Sudbai has no appetite, he found himself a famous local restaurant with the theme of Lao Qin's 8 big bowls. Because Sudbai arrived earlier, he didn't need to queue up to sing and sit down. After coming down and ordering food, Sudbai took out his mobile phone and casually browsed some news. Trump unexpectedly defeated Hillary, who was recognized and supported by America's upper-class celebrity society, and successfully ascended to the position of President of the United States with a background as a real estate tycoon. This news somewhat surprised Subai. Subai remembered that he seemed to have met this person once before. At that time, Trump was still opening a casino and his various businesses were very large. When Subai went to Guangzhou for half tourism and half business trip, and because of his status as the owner of the group, he was invited to attend a cooperation banquet between Evergrande Group and Trump Company. I remember that at that time, I was still a low-key young owner of a well-known domestic consortium, while Trump was already an internationally renowned asset tycoon. The individual and exchanged a few words at that time, but it was true that there was not much friendship. But now, many years later, this man has actually become the President of the United States. He has defeated his competitors who have rich political experience and extensive connections and influence. However, thinking about Trump and then thinking about himself, Subai couldn't help but smile. Just as the waiter brought the special rice wine, Subai took a sip. It was a little sweet and a little sour. In fact, looking at it from another perspective, my experience of being an audience member is much more magical than Trump's. Let's not talk about the other characteristics of Xi'an cuisine. First of all, the portions are large enough. This made Subai, who was used to eating Jiangsu and Zhejiang cuisine, a little uncomfortable. He ordered some dishes at random, and it seemed that they were enough for 5 or 6 people to eat together. Drinking a small drink and picking up a few bites of vegetables, Subai cherished this kind of leisure time in the busy life. Perhaps, he really lacked this kind of rest and relaxation time, which made him feel so depressed recently. The phone rang. Subai clicked it and saw it was a text message. Nowadays, very few people know Subai's phone number. Moreover, they often change their phones and cards recently. Generally, those who have contact with her can do so through WeChat. Contacting Subai instead of sending a text message, he clicked on the text message and saw the content of the text message. Subai couldn't help but smile a little. "Hello, I am Hillary. My campaign failed. My campaign team and sponsors all withdrew their capital and left. I am in urgent need of a venture capital of 2,000 yuan. If I succeed in running for President of the United States again in 8 years, we will return 10 times of your principal plus a US green card. Please remit the money to my CCB account." Terror broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 330. Subai remembered that these days, the country has become more and more severe in cracking down on telecom fraud. In the past, it was a bit laissez-faire. If you were defrauded by telecom fraud and reported it to the police station, the police would also persuade you that there was basically no hope of getting the money back. But now we take it very seriously. There are news reports every day saying that telecom fraudsters have been captured somewhere and so on. The reason is also because a few college students who were defrauded of their tuition fees committed suicide a while ago. Under China's social system, defrauding money is considered a trivial matter. As long as the impact is not big, it is no problem. However, several people committed suicide, causing it created a huge social sensation, and the state machinery started to pay attention to it and started to operate, and the results suddenly became very obvious. If we follow the custom of writing history books, the few college students who committed suicide may receive such a comment. Their deaths are a historical turning point in the process of combating telecommunications fraud in our country. Of course, teasing those college students like this was a bit disrespectful to the deceased. Subai drank the glass of rice wine in one gulp, then deleted this fraudulent text message that kept pace with the times, and walked to the front desk to pay the bill. Walked out of the store. Xi'an at night is even more desolate and cold. Xi'an is very big, but after all, it is not the developed cities along the coast of Beijing, Shanghai, and Guangzhou. At night, you can clearly feel its tranquility. This kind of atmosphere is what Subai likes. Only now that the blood corpse matter has been resolved can I truly let go of other thoughts and walk around aimlessly with a tourist mentality to feel the pulse of the city. Ahead, there was a roadside barbecue stall selling roasted gluten. Sudbai walked over with his head lowered and his face buried in the collar of his coat. "Sir, we meet again." Sudbai stopped and a slightly familiar voice sounded. Sudbai turned around and saw the female college student with a camera hanging around her neck. The female college student held several skewers of roasted gluten in her hand. She walked up to Sudbai and handed Sudbai 2 skewers. Sudbai shook his head, indicating that he didn't want to eat. If it were any other man, either shy or generous or someone who has his own intentions, he would feel a burst of joy, and words like "a night of lingering" and so on would immediately appear in his mind. Indeed, it was enough to foreshadow the 2 encounters with a young female student with a literary and artistic flair in a foreign country. However, Sudbai really had no interest at all. Maybe he was really a little frigid. "If you don't want to eat, where do you live?" the female college student asked while eating gluten. Sudbai smiled slightly and turned around to leave, but the female college student directly reached out and grabbed Sudbai's arm. He was eating barbecue just now, and his hands were inevitably stained with oil. He was grabbing the sleeves of his coat, which made Sudbai slightly unhappy. This was also because he had opened a detective agency now and was no longer the young master he used to be. Therefore, Sudbai cherished the details of life such as firewood, rice, oil, and salt more than before. "Speak," the female college student winked playfully. "You are not a local, are you? Are you staying at the hotel near the Shaanxi History Museum?" "I live at the home in there." Sudbai stretched out his hand, pinched the girl's hand and moved it away from his sleeve. He was indeed staying in a hotel across the street from the Shaanxi History Museum, but at this time he was disgusted with this girl disturbing his rare peace. At this moment, if the fat man were standing here, he would probably scold Sudbai for being crazy again and then take the initiative to go over and hold the young lady's hand. "I don't live there." Sudbai walked away. The walk lasted until 11 o'clock at night. Sudbai also estimated the time and distance and walked back to the hotel. Well, home in this world, maybe there really is something called fate. Sudbai really lived in a hotel with that girl. For other young people, although they may not necessarily develop into a couple, it is a good experience to be able to make a playmate while traveling. At least it can add a different and beautiful color to their travels, but Sudbai really I don't have that mood, nor do I have that need. I have just let go of the recent psychological pressure, and now is the time when I need to breathe quietly and relax alone. Enter from the foyer and take the elevator directly to the 5th floor. When the elevator door opened, Sudbai was slightly startled. At the elevator door, stood a girl wrapped in a coat and slippers who was obviously wet. At this scene, Sudbai was a little surprised whether there was such a coincidence. "The towels in my room were not clean. I went to the front desk to ask for towels." "What a coincidence, we met again." Sudbai nodded and got out of the elevator, while the girl got on the elevator. After returning to his room, Sudbai took off his windbreaker and sat on the bed. The TV was not turned on because Sudbai was afraid of the noise. At this time, the picture that Sudbai recalled in his mind was the scene when he met the girl when he came up in the elevator. There were obvious signs of water soaking on the side of the girl's slippers, while the deep mountain was only slightly wet. Like this, it's not like he just walked out of his room, it's more like he's been waiting outside the elevator for a long time. Sudbai's cell phone rang. It was a video call request from Fatty. After receiving the video, Sudbai saw the fat man, Gyatso, and the monk sitting next to the fat man. The 3 of them should be lying in a pedicure club now. Gyatso and the monk were both male technicians, while the fat man ordered a drop of water. "Damn girl." After the blood corpse was taken away by the horror broadcast, Sudbai and Fatty had a phone call and exchanged some things and details. Therefore, everyone was a little speechless about the whole incident, which was a bit ridiculous and coincidental. "Ah, Dabai, are you really not coming to Chongqing to find us? Let me tell you, the girls in the mountain city are really pretty. I'm taking a light rail today, and all the girls on the car are so tender that they can squeeze out tears." As if coming. Subai shook his head. "I have something else to do, so I'll go back to Shanghai first." The fat man took his mobile phone and waved to Gyatso and the monk beside him. "Brothers, did you hear this? This is obviously another clue and discovery. I want to eat alone." Subai smiled and did not refute. There was no need to refute this kind of thing, everyone could understand and be tolerant. Small fortunes can be made by oneself, and big fortunes can be made together. Just like Fang Wenhai's house, one person cannot take it down. "Are you still in Xi'an now?" Fatty asked. "Yes, the flight leaves tomorrow night." "Then be careful, don't be too greedy, it's best not to affect your state of entering the next story world." "Yo yo yo, yes, yes, just that place, press it more, it will feel comfortable." "I'm measured," Subai said and hung up the video. Dong dong dong. There was a knock on the door. Subai stood up and opened the door. There was not much surprise. Standing outside the door was the innocent-looking girl. The girl held 2 bottles of Coke in her hand. She handed one to Subai and said, "I'll give it to you to drink." "Yes, you're welcome." With that said, the girl took the initiative to help Subai open the can. "Don't think too much, this girl is very clean and self-sufficient." Subai took a sip, nodded, and said nothing more. Seeing that Subai really didn't want to chat, the girl gave up and turned directly to her room. After closing the door and playing with his phone for about a quarter of an hour, Subai took off his clothes and walked into the bathroom to take a shower. Just when the water was getting hot, the door to his room suddenly opened. It should be in a hotel. The door card was opened, but Subai did not hang the lock on the door. "Go in." The guy drank the medicine and should be on the ground now with no strength to move. The girl's cold voice came from the door, and there were 2 tall-looking men beside her. Subai, who was taking a shower in the bathroom, turned off the water, took out a bath towel and put it on himself. Really? In today's open and materialistic society, who would want to date a pure fate lover? It is indeed a bit whimsical. Fortunately, I did not take the bait, otherwise if this matter spreads, it may make the fat man and his group people die laughing. However, just as Subai was about to walk out of the bathroom, he suddenly felt a tightness in his chest, and a feeling of nausea suddenly came over him. Subai subconsciously sat down slowly against the glass in the bathroom. This was not a reaction caused by the so-called medicine in Coke. Subai's current body structure was different from that of ordinary people, so the intoxicating medicine suitable for ordinary people was the same as the sweat medicine. It will basically have no effect on Subai. Even if it does, his body will quickly detoxify itself. "The nausea I feel now is just the last time I faced the blood corpse in the hearse, the breath of the blood corpse hit my body." In addition, Subai was indeed a little short of energy and blood at that time, so even if the blood corpse was finally broadcast to the horror it was taken away, but a little bit of aura was still left in Subai's body. It had no big impact. It would only occasionally make Subai feel nauseous and dizzy. This symptom was actually weakening. It would take another 2 days. Subai was able to almost remove the remaining aura of the blood corpse, and the impact was not very big. 2 men walked into the bathroom at this time. One of the guys wearing a hat saw Subai sitting on the ground and immediately greeted. "Hey, no wonder I can't find anyone on the bed and floor." The medicine took effect in the shower. The girl also walked in. She changed her outfit, wearing leather boots on her feet and a red tights on her body. She no longer had the artistic and innocent style of the female college student before, but instead had a fierce look. Sometimes women are really they are so changeable that one set of clothes and one set of makeup can make them look like 2 different people. Walking to Sudbai's side, the girl touched Sudbai's leg with her leather boot. I've always been very good at judging people. This guy who travels alone has a very good family environment since he was a child. Don't look at it, the clothes he wears are not worth much, but I can tell at a glance whether he is rich or not. He is pretending to be low-key. At this time, Sudbai covered his forehead and looked at the girl in front of him. These three people thought that Sudbai was holding on to the effect of the medicine, so they didn't think it was strange. Some people have good physical constitution and are not prone to coma, which is normal, but their whole body is exhausted. It's certain that I can't move. I really have no money now, Sudbai said with a smile. The girl took out a dagger from her boots, and immediately put the cold dagger on Sudbai's face. If you dare to say that you don't have money to try it again, believe it or not, I will make a few cuts on your face to leave some artistic traces on your face, little white guy. Sudbai turned his head slightly, facing the mirror in the bathroom. This means, as if to say hurry up. I also appreciate it. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 331. It seems that our young master is quite tough. Sister Chu, don't mess with him. This is his mobile phone. There is no password lock. Just ask him to transfer the money to us, and we will take a photo of him. That's it. Let's go back and have some midnight snack. A big man began to urge. It was obvious that this was not the first time they had done this kind of work. They were really familiar with it. In some places, this phenomenon of slaughtering tourists does exist, and it is not slaughtering in the conventional sense in scenic spots, but is similar to kidnapping and extortion. After all, for tourists themselves, traveling to a foreign country is essentially if they are living in a foreign land, as long as they don't pay a lot of money and use some excuses to blackmail them, the tourists will basically admit their fault and not call the police to make the matter worse. Of course, the premise is that these criminals have the ability to accurately identify their prey. This woman named Chu Mei obviously regarded Sudbai as a young man traveling alone to find love, so she set her sights on Sudbai. She may have intended to seduce her, but Sudbai didn't take the bait at all. It had no meaning at all, so it ended up being this forced method of drugging. Chu Mei took Sudbai's mobile phone over. Sudbai had been more diligent in changing his mobile phone recently, so he didn't set up a password lock. Chu Mei directly clicked on the Alipay app, and then she frowned. It's only 2,500 yuan, and there is quick payment, yeah, the kind with a bank card tied to it. Sudbai shook his head. No, that's all. What Sudbai said is indeed the truth. To be honest, Sudbai really doesn't value money very much now. Otherwise, he wouldn't have gone through the discharge procedures when he was discharged from the hospital. The fat man had saved 8,000 yuan for himself before, which is equivalent to it was all in vain, but on the other hand, Sudbai really didn't have much money now. Damn it, after spending more than a day tracking people, just get 2,500 yuan? It's a lot of money for us, right? A big man yelled dissatisfiedly at the side. If this cost is not counted as labor, the money they pay for renting a room and even including the money to manage a certain staff member in the hotel is a big expense. 2,500 if it's 10,000 yuan, it's like working in vain, and they even put in a little bit of it. Generally speaking, they don't kill too many tourists, and it's enough to buy a land of 12,000 yuan, which is considered to be within the safety limit, but here Sudbai it was only 2,500 yuan, which meant that they lost money and could not even make a profit. I have never heard of anyone paying for the robbery at the end. The man squatted down, grabbed Sudbai's hair, and raised Sudbai's face. He pointed at Sudbai and said viciously, "Be sensible, waste money and eliminate disasters. No one of us will embarrass anyone. I know, listen, your accent should be from Jiangsu and Zhejiang, but our place is different from yours. The customs, rule of law, etc. are all different, do you know? This really pissed off the grandpas. They bundled you up in a sack and buried you alive somewhere to see if they could find you. This man was obviously relying on Sudbai not being a local, so he was fooling Sudbai. People in many places have serious regional discrimination, or regional intolerance. Even in this era, many young people really think that except for his own city and a few other specific big cities, the rest of the places are remote areas with extremely chaotic security. Sudbai didn't pay much attention to this threat. The other party obviously didn't seem to be a pure liquor of blood. He was probably just following the path of a fairy. Beating people and extorting money was fine. If he really wanted to kill people and mutilate corpses, I guess I really don't have the guts, because it's actually not difficult to investigate this matter. Xi'an is not a rural area or a place like ravines. The cameras on the road, the cameras in hotels, etc. actually leave a lot of clues. It's really if life is to be caused, none of these people can escape. Chu Mei transferred the money from Sudbai's Alipay, and then started looking through Sudbai's phone book. She was shocked to find that there weren't even many call records in it, and they all seemed to be local takeaways or Didi rides. Master, but this further strengthens Chu Mei's belief that Sudbai's family is very rich. Why would a person with no money be so low-key? Isn't it because he is afraid of being robbed? It is obvious that there is no silver 300 taels here. Chu Mei opened Sudbai's WeChat. There were not many WeChat friends in it, and there were only a few in the chat history. The fat man who had just ended the video call was the first one. You didn't say yes, so I asked your friend for it. Chu Mei decisively clicked on the fat man's avatar and then sent out a voice chat request. Sudbai was no longer nauseous and dizzy at this time, but he still sat on the ground with a faint smile on his face. This time, he should regard it as the last interesting thing before leaving Xi'an. After all, he was blackmailed. Being robbed is not something that happens easily. Perhaps Sudbai's thinking circuit is really different. He was indifferent to the encounter with the police before, but now he becomes excited when he encounters the robbery. Fatty answered the voice. Dabai, what's going on? Monk and Gyatso went to have tea. I'm doing massage on my back here with essential oil. It's very comfortable. There should be massage services in your hotel. You can also find one to do it. The fat man's voice was loud, and his sister was on speakerphone again. After hearing these words, she frowned, but at least one thing was confirmed. This friend, who should be his hostage, wanted $1 million from him. Bucks shouldn't be a problem. To be honest, Sudbai's calmness did make the uneasy feeling in Chu Mei's heart become more and more serious. She had this kind of uneasy feeling before doing this kind of work, but I don't know why it was more serious this time. Your friend is in my hands now. Chu Mei said coldly. The fat man was stunned for a moment, and then shouted anxiously, "Who are you? Everything is easy to talk about, don't be impulsive." The fat man got off the massage table and ran out wearing only a pair of underpants. Sudbai was defeated by an audience member, and now his life was in his hands. This matter was no small matter. In fact, the four of them, Fatty, Sudbai, Monk and Gyatso, usually scheme and trick each other, but they all have a sense of proportion. There is not much affection or friendship between them, but there is also a sense of sympathy for each other. Therefore, if they can save the other party's life, they are willing to pay some as long as the price is within an affordable range. Just like if Fatty suddenly called Sudbai for help one day, Sudbai would probably not ignore him. Hearing the anxious reaction from the fat man, Chu Mei smiled slightly. Obviously, the two people have a good relationship, so it is more certain to ask for money. Transfer 20,000 yuan to this WeChat ID, otherwise I can't guarantee what will happen to him. His face is very smooth and tender, even smoother than our women. I am really jealous. I really want to take a knife and score it a few times. The fat man, who was rushing to the lounge to find the monks and the others who were drinking tea, staggered when he heard these words and asked in disbelief. "Nani? Tell me again, what do you want?" 20,000 yuan, Chu Mei repeated. "Story points? You're crazy, you want so many." "What story point?" Chu Mei frowned. 20,000 yuan, do you understand? Don't tell me you don't have that much money in your card now. I don't need to listen to excuses. I only want the transfer to be completed within 3 minutes. RMB, the fat man's voice suddenly rose, with a strong sense of disbelief. Which listener would arrest another listener to extort RMB if his brain was kicked by a donkey? MDZZ. "Hey, are you listening to me?" Chu Mei urged when she saw the fat man suddenly stop talking. At this time, the fat man had turned away from going to the lounge. Instead, he walked back to the massage room. Seeing that the other end of the phone was still chattering, the fat man immediately said, "You ensure his safety. Don't say 20,000, I will give you 1 million right away. Remember, you must not hurt him at all." 1 million? Chu Mei was stunned for a moment, and then he received a transfer picture. Chu Mei reached out and clicked on it. This was not a real screenshot of the transfer, but a GIF emoticon. After clicking on it, the transfer picture disappeared and an emoticon of an artillery soldier dropping a bomb appeared instead. Subai, who knew what would happen, couldn't help laughing at this moment, and actually laughed out loud. Snapped. Chu Mei directly placed Subai's cell phone heavily on the wash basin, then grabbed Subai and made Subai face the mirror on the wash basin. "Do you really think I don't dare to see blood?" The tip of Chu Mei's dagger pierced Subai's face, and then began to move slowly, but she was very measured and only made a shallow 3-centimeter cut, letting the blood flow out. "Let me see if you can still smile." Chu Mei was stunned for a moment. She saw Subai in the mirror, who was really still smiling. Moreover, for some reason, Subai's hand suddenly reached out with strength and grabbed his hand. He was surprised that he couldn't break free. Then, an even more horrifying scene appeared. Not only Chu's sister was shocked, but the two big men were also a little frightened and at a loss. Subai was holding Chu Mei's hand and scratching it on his face. Deep wounds appeared on Subai's face. 1 knife. 2 knives. 3 swords. 4 swords. Subai's originally handsome face was now a bit miserable. Blood was dripping down. Subai stuck out his tongue and took a lick. He was still smiling, and his smile became more and more weird. "Sister Chu, let's go, this guy is a lunatic and a psychopath," a big man no longer intends to continue. "If the matter really gets too big, no one will be safe." But Chu Mei couldn't walk anymore. Her feet were getting weak, and her face was completely distorted with fear. Because she saw that the bloody wound on Subai's face was healing at a speed visible to the naked eye. After about 10 seconds, not even a scar was left on his face. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 332. Subai remembered that there was a time when he needed to find those guilty people to kill, to find dark and gray areas in the cracks of the legal society, to indulge and vent his inner emotions. Many restrictions, often an operation requires more than half a month to collect intelligence and formulate a plan, so that the killing is foolproof and will never implicate oneself. At that time, I and the other 3 members of the club were considered a very influential group in terms of social status and energy, so they were able to act again and again without making any mistakes. However, for Subai now, this kind of behavior of just secretly picking up a few rubbish from society to kill is a bit like looking at the photos of himself playing marbles as a child when he grows up. It is a bit childish and a bit ridiculous. The height is different, the level is different, and naturally the conditions that can trigger excitement are also different. Chu Mei was so scared that she was paralyzed. She leaned her back against the tiles in the bathroom. Looking at Sudbai's still delicate and scar-free face, she felt as if her heart was about to pop out of her body. The two big men behind him were inexplicable at first when they saw that Chu Mei was suddenly frightened like this. However, when Sudbai turned his head and looked at them, they were also frightened. Magician, a big man pursed his lips and said, obviously, he was subconsciously looking for a reasonable explanation for the strange scene in front of him. The other big man seemed to be suddenly stimulated to have courage at this time, and directly stretched out his legs to kick Sudbai. This reaction was a bit like a person who found a colorful spider on the wall of his home. It may be poisonous or not. It was poisonous, but I still mustered up the courage to take a book and take a photo directly, no matter what happened. This is not courage, in fact it is just a kind of recklessness. To be more precise, it is actually another extreme manifestation of a person being at a loss when facing unknown things. Sudbai pinched the big man's foot with one hand. The big man's powerful kick could not make any waves in Sudbai's hand. Then, Sudbai twisted his wrist, and the big man's entire leg was broken at this time. He let out a cry of pain and fell to the ground. Stepping forward, Sudbai gently rubbed his nails on the top of the big man's head. Before the big man could recover from the pain just now, he felt a sudden numbness on the top of his head. Then, his whole body was covered with numbness. A layer of frost arose, and the vitality was immediately annihilated. A layer of frost also formed on the body, turning it directly into an ice sculpture. The ice sculpture does not have much beauty, because the fearful expression of the big man is also frozen. Boring. Boring. This is how Sudbai felt after killing this person. I no longer have the pleasure I felt after just killing someone and the excitement I felt after taking a psychoactive drug. A little numb and a little boring. It's like accidentally stepping on an ant while walking. I don't feel guilty, and I don't think it should be worth caring about. When another big man saw this scene, he immediately turned around and tried to leave the room, but as soon as his body rushed out of the bathroom, his chest was pierced by one of Sudbai's hands, and the big man was lifted up by Sudbai like he was skewering toothpicks. He got up and then threw it on the bathroom tiles. After being thrown on the ground, his body twitched twice and became motionless. The blood slowly spread and soaked the entire bathroom tile floor. The death of two people, the smell of blood suddenly filled the air. Sudbai took a deep breath, and a soothing emotion appeared on his face. Maybe killing ordinary people now does not mean much to Sudbai, but it is fresh. The bloody smell still made Sudbai instinctively feel very comfortable. Blood, what a beautiful thing. Many times, Sudbai didn't feel that he was a vampire. He rarely lived as a vampire. More often, he just used the vampire bloodline as a tool for himself, without thinking about integrating into its habits. He didn't think about integrating into its culture, which was very utilitarian. Putting aside battles, Sudbai rarely remembered in daily life. Oh, I'm a vampire. Two of his accomplices died in front of him. Chu Mei huddled in the corner, shivering. For an ordinary person, the previous scenes were enough to subvert all her knowledge and even destroy her worldview. Even if the police suddenly rushed in to arrest Chu Mei during the extortion and kidnapping, she would not be as frightened and desperate as she is now. Human beings always succumb to the fear of the unknown. Sudbai's hand gently placed on Chu Mei's face. This face was indeed smooth and tender, and she did have the capital to pretend to be an innocent female college student to do things. Judging from the fact that they are so familiar with the rhythm and method of committing crimes, they must have been doing this for a long time. Chu Mei is a very smart girl, so this group of them rarely makes mistakes or makes mistakes. In fact, Chu Mei is very fond of Sudbai didn't miss it. Sudbai looked like a rich man even though he was wearing not very expensive clothes. As an ordinary person, who would know about the audience? After a while, sharp nails appeared on Sudbai's fingers, carrying a dirty and evil aura, and gently pierced the skin of Chu Mei's face. The zombie's fingernails were filled with corpse poison. Although it was just a small cut, much smaller than the wound that Chu's sister scratched on Sudbai's face at the beginning. It was certainly not fatal, but the corpse poison continued to spread to Chu's sister. His entire face began to age and ulcerate, but he did not dare to move, and there were tears in his eyes. The originally beautiful face suddenly turned into the appearance of an ugly old woman, exuding a disgusting stench. Looking at it this way, it looks much more beautiful, doesn't it? Sudbai lifted her sister up, put her face against the mirror, and opened her eyes, forcing her to look at his face at this moment. There may be violence hidden deep in a person's heart. Everyone has the potential to become a devil. Sudbai now perfectly explains this. However, the more advanced aspect of humans than animals is that humans are good at using hypocrisy to disguise themselves. Just like in the Killing Club before, the main purpose is clearly not to protect social peace, and it has nothing to do with Batman's behavior. It is just to find excitement and vent the garbage emotions in the heart, but it still only seeks those with guilty debts. Killing people instead of looking for ordinary people is just for a kind of false comfort in the heart, under the banner of doing justice for heaven. In fact, it is just to do whatever feels good to you. These are three robbers. This woman just stabbed herself in the face with a dagger. But to put it bluntly, what kind of threat and harm could these three robbers pose to Sudbai? Obviously, it cannot. They have committed many crimes before, but do the victims who were robbed or photographed have anything to do with Sudbai? Obviously, no. Even though Sudbai felt a little dizzy and nauseous at the time, it was still very easy to kill these three ordinary people who took the initiative to cover the door to harm him. Killing them like this would not be a problem for the terrorist broadcaster. What kind of cause and effect will be counted, because this is a legitimate defense that is inappropriate and inappropriate? However, it is precisely because of this psychological foundation that Sudbai can now vent his bad taste on this girl with peace of mind. Of course, it is bad taste for Sudbai, but for this girl, is a kind of horrific torture both physically and mentally. This look is the real beauty, isn't it? Sudbai put his delicate and handsome face together with that of his sister, and the two of them looked in the mirror together, as if they were a pair of best friends of the opposite sex. It's really, really beautiful. Sudbai sighed again, and kissed Chu Mei's ugly face gently, and then let go of her hand. Chu Mei fell to the ground like mud. She was still alive, but her eyes were only dull and bewildered. Sudbai took out a cigarette, lit it, took a puff, blew out a smoke ring, and then shook the cigarette butt in front of his sister. Shake off a piece of soot. Dear passengers, the plane has landed at Shanghai Pudong International Airport. Please wait for the light prompts in the cabin before leaving your position and preparing to disembark. After getting off the plane, Sudbai carried a shoulder bag and got in the taxi at the waiting area. Even though it was already late at night, most places in Shanghai were still lively. If Xi'an is a calm and solemn old man with a sense of vicissitudes of life, then Shanghai is a young man full of restlessness. The two cities each have their own flavor and differences, and the pace of life of the people in the city naturally has great differences. Difference. Arriving at the bottom of the building, Sudbai walked in from the side door. Not far ahead was the elevator. After returning to Shanghai, Sudbai naturally couldn't go straight to Frankenstein's house without stopping. Of course, he went home to see his son first. Just when Sudbai was about to enter the elevator, a shadow appeared at the corner. Sudbai stopped, turned around, and faced that direction. Ji Xiang stood in the corner, staring at Sudbai with his cold eyes. Sudbai's breathing became faster at this time, but he still subconsciously spread his hands and said with a smile on his face, "I don't know what kind of close relationship that guy has with you, but I can tell you now that he should be GG. The aura on Jixiang's body began to become stronger and stronger, and the surrounding air pressure also became chaotic at this time. Subai stood there, not preparing to fight, and just looked at Jixiang calmly. A few moments. Jixiang turned sideways, walked over from the corner with a bag in his mouth, and got on the elevator first. The bag contained fresh milk that Jixiang had just gotten for the little guy. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 333. The elevator rose slowly, and Jixiang just squatted there with the bag of fresh milk in his mouth, his expression serious and unsmiling. Although Jixiang has always had such a cold attitude, Subai can still feel a different feeling. The relationship between the blood corpse and Jixiang is definitely unusual, but at least now it seems that Jixiang is not interested in the blood corpse. The plan to settle accounts with Subai. So, what is the relationship between Jixiang and Liqi? Some doubts are destined to be unsolved for the time being, because Jixiang cannot speak. Although Subai knows that if Jixiang is willing to talk, there will be no obstacles or problems even if Jixiang cannot speak, but Subai understands that in the future, Jixiang will not speak. With Jixiang's temperament, he would not be willing to just sit there peacefully and slowly tell Subai his past stories. This was not in line with this cat's style of painting. The elevator door opened and Jixiang walked quickly back to the detective office, followed by Subai. When he got home, he took off his windbreaker and placed the 2 Hellfire shotguns on the coffee table. After washing his face, Subai walked directly into the bedroom. The little guy was already lying on the bed and asleep, and Jixiang was gently stroking the little guy's back. No matter what, Subai is very reassured by this cat's attitude and attentiveness towards the little guy. He doesn't know why Jixiang is so attached to the little guy, but sometimes he feels this way about children and pets. It's hard to explain rationally, you might fall in love with it at first sight, and there's no reason to explain it. Sitting gently on the edge of the bed, Subai looked at the little guy sleeping peacefully. He couldn't help but reached out and gently rubbed his cute face. The little guy seemed to feel itchy in his sleep, so he subconsciously used his little hands to he touched his face, then changed his position and continued sleeping. Subai stood up, walked to the desk, opened the drawer, and took out a house card from it. Jixiang lay down on the bed with the little guy and started to sleep. He didn't care what Subai was going to do. Subai, who had rested on the plane, really didn't feel much sleep at this time. Since he had returned home to see the child, he should seize the time to visit Frankenstein's house. If things go well, he should be able to take it with him tomorrow morning. After breakfast, the little guy just got up at that time. Gently closing the bedroom door, Subai picked up his car keys and walked out of the office. He took the elevator to the underground parking lot and got into his Pusa. Subai did not rush to start the car, but subconsciously he looked at the radio column in the car. I don't know why, but at this moment, the image of my first contact with a horror broadcast came to mind. At that time, I had just killed the female white-collar worker and got into a car with a driver who had just hit and killed a person. The 2 people who had just had blood on their hands bumped into each other. Now that I think about it, the driver should have been an experiencer, just like me, but he seemed to be a bit unlucky. He died directly in the story world, while Subai survived. Suddenly, there was a feeling of sadness. Subai picked up the chewing gum in the car, tore open the package and put it in his mouth to chew. After starting the car, a midnight golden song program came from the radio. The song that was playing was Su Song's Funeral of Roses. A sad song with an upbeat tempo. The car drove out of the parking lot and onto the highway. The sound of the radio sounded very clear inside the car. The windows and doors completely blocked out the noise outside, creating a special atmosphere. In this era, listening to the radio has indeed become a very outdated form of entertainment. In the past few years, the largest groups of radio listeners were drivers, migrant workers, and students. But now with the increasing popularity of smartphones, it is also drivers. Due to the nature of work, I still insist on listening to the radio every day. The rest of the staff rarely listen to this for a long time. There is nothing we can do about it. After all, the times are constantly developing, and most industries and supplies will gradually change over time, slowly disappearing in the tide. Perhaps, in a few years, holding a radio and walking on the street while listening to the sound on the radio will become a kind of anti-trend fashionism. At this thought, Subai couldn't help but laugh. It must be because he just returned home and met the little guy, so Subai was in a good mood now. The car turned into a new campus. There was a security booth at the door. Subai tried to swipe the sensor with the door card, and the fence rose. It was indeed a card with multiple uses. The car was parked in the underground parking lot of the community. Subai took the elevator up and found the building marked on the door card. When standing in front of the door, Subai hesitated. Subai was wondering whether he needed to get one. Put on chemical protective clothing and then go in? After all, the scene in which Frankenstein used poison to poison the powerful black audience member really left a deep impression on Subai. However, since they are all here, it doesn't matter, and most people don't turn their homes into a drug den. After swiping the key card, the door lock rang and he opened it. Subai walked in. It was a standard 3-bedroom and 1 living room. The decoration was pretty good. It was simple but not simple. Generally speaking, when you look at a house, the decoration style can tell the aesthetic appreciation level of the owner of the household. Subai was not surprised that Frankenstein could decorate such a stylish house. He was a genius, so he couldn't be too bad in any aspect. There is a cup of coffee sitting on the marble table in the living room. It is probably a few months old. The coffee has not solidified, and of course there is no heat, but it looks like it was poured just 2 hours ago. Naturally, Subai was not that mean-spirited to pick up the coffee and take a sip. Even if the coke given to him in Xi'an was laced with sweat medicine, Subai was not worried. However, Subai really didn't dare to taste the food in this house. The kitchen was no different from an ordinary person's kitchen. Subai went directly to the first bedroom and opened the door. The scene inside made Subai's pupils freeze. There were pictures of people hanging on the walls of this bedroom. There are a dazzling array of skins, and there is a long bright lamp swaying in the middle, adding a strange and gloomy feeling. Frankenstein uses a scientific method to connect ghosts with modern technology, and also incorporates modern pharmacology, so he can come up with something that makes the audience find it incredible. There are no less than 30 pieces of human skin on the wall, each of which can be called a work of art, because when it is taken from the human body, its integrity is shown to the greatest extent, and the physical characteristics of women and men are also displayed very delicately. When Subai entered, the originally bright yellow flame of the Changming lantern suddenly turned green, and faint cries could be heard in the room. Subai frowned, took a step back, and closed the door. Pushing open the second door, the furnishings inside were much more modern. It was a completely modern scientific research laboratory. All kinds of equipment that Subai knew and didn't recognize were densely piled here, and some of the instruments still had lights on. Entering the third room, it seemed a little empty. There were some bottles and herbal specimens here. This was actually where Subai's real interest lay. After all, Subai is not a Frankenstein. Even if the research equipment and raw materials here were given to Subai, Subai would not be able to create a controllable ghost like the boy in red, nor could he create a ghost that could quietly poison a powerful audience. For potions, Subai came here just to see if there was any ready-made bargains to pick up. If there is, everyone will be happy and the trip is worthwhile. If not, Subai's plan is to destroy this place. After all, this house is ownerless now. If one day the property owner or a thief comes in and gets something, the impact was too great. Subai was not a saintly person, but it was just something that could be done easily. There were several colorful bottles and jars on the shelf. Subai tried hard to remember which one that Frankenstein used to poison the black audience. He found that he had no clue in his mind. This was very embarrassing. The potion in each jar, it must have different effects. Subai can't just leave it to chance. But he couldn't just try the medicine casually, and there was no suitable target for him to apply it. He put all these ready-made bottles and cans into his satchel, and also collected some strange-looking specimens. There were not many, but he still packed the satchel to a full extent. At this time, the sounds in the first bedroom seemed to be getting louder and louder. It was a bit like a pet that had been idle at home for a long time suddenly sensed the breath of a living person and began to make a fuss waiting for the arrival of its owner. Subai walked to the living room, took a look, and found that if he wanted to set a fire, it would easily affect other residents, and the fire might have the opposite effect. The solution once and for all is for Subai to make several trips back and forth to transport these things to sparsely populated areas and find ways to destroy them, but Subai finds this very annoying and is too lazy to spend the spare time. To be honest, after looking at this house, Subai still admired the Frankenstein's ability. It was really amazing that one person could tinker with something like that in this house. Even, Subai, there is also a faint feeling of regret. I killed this person like this in the first place. It did feel like a waste of natural resources. If this guy is still alive and can help him keep making potions related to this, that would be a really happy thing. Just when Subai was standing in the living room thinking wildly. Click. Outside the house. There was a sound of swiping the door card and door lock. Subai's eyes suddenly fell to the coffee cup on the table again. Could it be? Did someone really just pour this coffee? Terror broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 334. Subai threw the satchel behind the sofa in the living room, and then his whole body turned into a blood mist, hiding in a dark corner. This kind of hiding method is not difficult to find for listeners of the same level, but Subai believes that the person who will come in should not be a listener, but maybe an ordinary person. In fact, from another perspective, if Frankenstein had an ordinary person, it is also normal for someone to be an assistant. The door was pushed open, and two people walked in. One was a little girl in a red dress, and the other was a man in his 20s with long, oily hair and a shaggy face. The man walked to the table, reached for the coffee and took a sip. He closed his eyes and pretended to taste it carefully. A cup of cold coffee, how about this? The girl was only 7 or 8 years old and petite, but her tone of voice did not sound like a pure girl. You're here again. I have my own way of life, please respect me, the young man said solemnly. The girl pouted and said nothing. Then she sat down on the table in the living room, her eyes wandering as if she was sizing up the place. Then, as if she thought of something, she said, "Ever since he disappeared with the boy in red, you haven't done anything satisfactory to me." The girl said while playing with her fingers. "It's really too much mud to hold up the wall. While asking for the same treatment and qualifications as your original master, you are also clamoring for respect and even more resources, but you can't produce the same or even half the results as your previous master." The young man's chest began to rise and fall. "I need some time. In the past, I was only allowed to do his experiments, so I wasn't really familiar with the core technology. But these days, I have studied it to a great extent. That kind of I can also make some potions and keep them in the storage room. Also, I am disgusted with the tone you use when talking to me. Please pay attention to yourself or I will ask you to leave my laboratory." The girl smiled, stretched out her hand and pointed at the young man. The young man immediately floated up and was stuck to the wall. This is the power of thought to control physical objects. The girl's smile disappeared and she looked at the young man with a mocking attitude. "I've said it before, you don't have to learn everything from your previous master. he is qualified to speak rudely in front of me because he can come up with something valuable enough for me. And you, please respect yourself, you are just his apprentice. Don't imitate and learn his attitude towards me before you reach his level. My patience is really limited." The young man's face changed. Finally, he took a deep breath and nodded. After a while, the pressure on his body disappeared and he fell from the wall. The girl took out a mobile phone and said, "Okay, go ahead and do your work. I'll wait for your results. It's not too early now. I'll order some takeout and finish the meal on the spot. I have no appetite. You can eat. I have to continue the work at hand. Believe me, it won't be long before I am qualified to speak to you in the same tone as my previous master. I'm looking forward to it." The girl smiled and shook her head. She didn't care about other people's attitudes toward her, she only cared about the value others had for her. As for the eccentric temperament of these real scientific researchers in a certain cutting-edge field, girls can fully accept it, or at least, they can tolerate it. The young man walked into the laboratory, while the girl stayed alone in the living room and continued to click on her mobile phone. "I'll just have a piece of braised chicken and a cup of Coke. What about you?" The young man has already entered the laboratory. Obviously, the little girl did not say these words to the young man. Subai walked out of the shadows at this time and stood behind the little girl. "Is there any pizza?" "Sorry, it's almost midnight, no more. We have hamburgers, fried chicken, and the like. Would you like some?" "Good." The little girl nodded and placed the order. Then, the little girl put her feet on the chair, hugged her knees, and looked at Subai pitifully. "You won't hurt me, will you?" Subai took 2 steps forward, then stopped, lowered his head, and saw a knife stabbed into his lower abdomen. High speed. There is no leakage of breath. So Subai only found out that there was such a knife on his body after he felt the pain. The little girl pouted, "I can see that you are a vampire, but forgive me. I am here in the East. It is rare to see Oriental people redeeming this kind of physical enhancement. In the past, I have seen the self-recovery of vampires in many movies and TV series. Ability, so now I want to see it live, and besides, I know you won't agree, so I won't tell you yet." Subai pulled out the knife from his lower abdomen. The position where the knife penetrated was very precise. It would not hurt the spleen or other important places, but would simply leave a wound and bleed. Obviously, what the little girl was talking about was yes, she really just wanted to watch a realistic version of the vampire self-recovery show. "I don't like this way of greeting you." Subai dropped the knife on the ground and looked at the little girl who was still acting cute. The little girl tilted her head slightly and looked at Subai with a childish look on her face. "Then what if someone comes uninvited and secretly steals things from me while no one is in my house?" This was a good rhetorical question, but the little girl obviously underestimated the thickness of Subai's face. Subai looked around sadly and said seriously, "Eliminating harm for the people." Frankenstein almost killed Subai by using the things produced in this laboratory. When Subai came here when he had time, whether he destroyed this laboratory or took away the things in this laboratory, there would be no causal relationship. Makes sense. The little girl sighed, "I don't think I can beat you." When the little girl finished speaking, Subai's hand suddenly stretched out. His left hand instantly transformed into a zombie and became extremely hard. He directly grasped a metal piece that was about to be quietly removed. Stab into the back of his head. The little girl shrugged, "Look, when you are absolutely vigilant, my mind attack method can basically not cause any harm to you, so we'd better sit down and have a good talk. This laboratory belongs to me. I invested and funded sit-up, and some of the ghosts and even some low-level magic weapons in it were obtained through audience forums. Moreover, the things produced in this laboratory also gave me a lot of weight to survive in the story world. Code. This is a big cake, and you can definitely get a piece of it instead of ruining it." That would be such a pity, wouldn't it? Subai was really a bit resistant to the little girl's honest chatting and behavioral patterns. Could it be that this girl was the Tianshan child mother? In fact, he is much older than he looks now. I know what you are thinking now. You are thinking, how can you trust me, how can you ensure that this matter goes on smoothly and the spoils are divided smoothly? This is indeed a very confusing question, because this is just our first meeting and we are not familiar with each other yet. The little girl stretched, Subai's satchel opened automatically, and some bottles and cans inside floated out. The red one is a corrosive potion, the blue one is a soul paralyzing potion, and the purple one is not a potion, but a will-o'-the-wisp starter. You can use it as a concentrated explosive. This purple one is completely useless. Under normal circumstances, most story world horror broadcasts will not allow us to bring this purple one in, because it does not belong to the category of potions and conflicts with most of the story world environments. Can we bring this one in? It's better to put in small nuclear bombs. The girl introduced these things in detail, appearing very patient and careful. I don't know why, looking at this girl, Subai suddenly thought of Fatty. Compared to pretending to be a pig and eating a tiger, Fatty seemed to be slightly inferior to the previous girls. After all, this kind of natural little girl always has a cute face. It can relax your nerves inadvertently. The wound on Subai's lower abdomen has healed, and even blood has not spilled out. The little girl's eyes swept over there and exclaimed. It seems that the level of your bloodline is quite high. It really surprises me that there are people in the Eastern circles who play the bloodline to such an advanced level. I've seen a more advanced one, Subai said, referring to Lan Lin. Who is it? Died. How did you die? Suicide. The little girl picked up the teacup. The water inside was cold. She just took a sip. It's really interesting. Okay. Now let's discuss the specific cooperation process. With that said, the little girl put down her teacup, jumped off the chair, and walked into the kitchen. I remember there is still some mango juice squeezed out in the morning at home. We can share a cup. There was a glass door between the kitchen and the living room. The moment the girl closed the door, the entire living room was instantly filled with black. It didn't look like a barrier or an array. It was a bit like a magnetic field mutated by ghost power. The strange area is obviously another pit. The little girl opened the refrigerator in the kitchen, took out the glass of mango juice, and took a sip with a sarcastic smile on her face. Dear Nian, you are really a mess. At this moment, the mango juice in the little girl's hand was taken away by the other hand. Subai also took a sip. It was very sweet and refreshing. Don't always want to make big news, Subai stared at the little girl and said. The little girl stood there stunned, looking embarrassed. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 335. This is a very impractical thing he originally designed. It uses a magnetic field and a specific circuit of ghosts to create a shielded area. In fact, according to him, it just completely deceives all normal perceptions of people in an instant, and then this mistake it takes a certain amount of time to judge and it is not lethal. You don't have to worry about anything. If you want to drink mango juice, I will bring it out. There is no need to follow me into the kitchen in the first place. The little girl said indifferently, that person does have a lot of geeks in my opinion, but the practicality of that thing in the living room is not so much used for audience battles. I think it is more suitable for making money in the movie theater. Look, now do you feel that the living room is gradually returning to light and brightness? The little girl pointed outside the glass door of the kitchen. Sure enough, the light in the living room began to slowly recover, and returned to normal after about 10 seconds. Don't mind, I just want to show you these weird inventions. The girl walked out of the kitchen carrying the remaining half glass of mango juice and returned to the living room. Subai stood in front of her. It's just a pity. I still admire him very much, but he disappeared inexplicably. Well, now that I see you appearing in this room, should I think about it in a normal way? He is outside. I met you, then foolishly provoked you and ended up being killed by you. The little girl took another sip of mango juice. But I'm very strange. How did you know this location and this place? Subai looked at the little girl and reached out to grab her. Her feet immediately hung in the air and quickly left Subai's side, but she still maintained a sweet smile. Do you think I'm bored, or do you think I'm thinking of other ways to tease you and tease you? Subai didn't speak, but his whole body began to gradually switch to zombie state. Don't, you've become so hard. I really have nothing to do. How can I control my mind to stab you? The little girl said sweetly, while her eyes began to wander around. Subai's body bounced away from where he was and rushed towards the little girl. The little girl waved her hand and formed 7 invisible barriers between herself and Subai. However, Subai broke through 6 of them in one breath, and the remaining one was already in danger. What the little girl said before is true. Her strength is indeed much worse than that of Subai. The reason why she talked so much and worked out so many things before was actually just to gain time and allow herself to think. Time. Because you are not a person of strength, you often do not have the qualifications and opportunities for equal dialogue and cooperation. Why should we cooperate? The girl knew that what she had, Subai could also have. She could let the apprentice continue the experiment, and Subai could do the same. Regardless of whether Subai wanted to continue to keep this laboratory, Subai did not cooperate with her. Necessary. The relationship between the audience is often the most bloody law of the jungle. Snapped. The last barrier was broken, and the evil energy around Subai spread out, constricting the little girl's space to move, making it difficult for even the power of her mind to continue to extend. This is catching a turtle in a jar. During these days, Subai has been in contact and fighting with those whose strength far exceeds his own. To be honest, he has almost forgotten that he is not at the bottom of the entire audience class. The scene of beating others with strength is really a bit unfamiliar. A row of silver needles appeared in the little girl's hand. There was a special brilliance on the silver needles. Then a row of needles stabbed directly at Subai. After being shot out, these needles turned into green smoke and seemed to disappear. But after a moment, all of them pierced into Subai's body, especially Subai's arms, which was particularly serious. This kind of needle can actually dissipate and then recondensate in an unexpected way. Only those with enhanced mental power can use this weapon. However, to Subai, this injury was really just a skin injury. He quickly tightened his muscles, controlled all the needles on his body to prevent them from being withdrawn, and then moved closer to the little girl. At this moment, the distance between Subai and the little girl was less than half a meter. A string of agate appeared on the little girl's chest. The agate turned into an emerald green barrier and enveloped the little girl. This kind of short-term defensive magic weapon was very common. Subai had seen a lot, so he did not continue to use it at the moment. Instead of using brute force to break it, he directly took out the Hellfire shotgun, and the muzzles of the 2 guns were almost directly pressed against the light mask. Both hands pulled the trigger at the same time. Boom! There was a muffled sound, and Subai felt his ears buzzing. The light shield collapsed in an instant. The little girl spit out a mouthful of blood and hit the wall directly, and slowly fell down, leaving a trace on the wall. A pool of blood looked very scary and embarrassing. Subai also slowly landed on the ground. He did not continue to kill, but just stared at the little girl coldly. The red dress on the little girl was also in tatters at this time. She was originally a cute Lolita like a porcelain doll, but now she looked like a broken Barbie doll. Come on, why don't you just kill me? The little girl looked at Subai with a hint of provocation, seemingly unaware that she had been completely defeated in the brief fight. Subai turned around and looked at the door of the laboratory. The door slowly opened at this time, and the two doors opened together. There were more than 30 human skins stored in one bedroom. These human skins should not be killed by the little girl herself. She would not kill people stupidly. The reason why the skin provokes so many karmas should be peeled off from the dead through other channels. These human skins are now floating out. Some of them still have hair on them, and some have no hair retained on them. At the same time, there seems to be a flame burning underneath the human skin. This kind of flame is not really burning the human skin, but creates a strange atmosphere, and the sight on the human skin can also be continuously distorted. Gradually, pieces of clothing appear. These clothes are either servants, brides, officials, or pawns, all from Hong Kong at the end of the last century. A common image in the film is that more than 30 human skins are floating around, giving people a sense of oppression. Next to the other door, the slovenly man was holding a bone in his hand. The bone was embedded with many things, including runes and gems. The most bizarre thing was that there was an antenna. This feeling is very inconsistent. These human skins are controlled by remote control like remote control cars. Blood continued to flow from the corner of the little girl's mouth, but she still slowly stood up with strength. I have never been able to bring this thing into the story world, so I also feel that it is very useless, because I rarely go in the real world. There is no need to provoke other audiences. But now it's ready for you to use. There are no surveillance cameras in this room, but there are many pairs of eyes here. These ghost eyes are sometimes more trustworthy than the cameras, so before we entered the house, we already knew that someone was in the house uninvited. Subai was surrounded by a group of human skins, but he didn't feel too scared. He had even seen the bloody corpses several times, and everything in front of him was nothing. However, Subai did not deny that these human skins were difficult to deal with, because after they came out, the trajectory of these human skins actually followed the U-steps. This kind of footwork and rhythm had been demonstrated to Subai by Fatty before. However, the general meaning is that Fatty's footwork for summoning thunder tribulation also has the shadow of Ubuletin in it, but the real Ubuletin only exists in very ancient classics. Even if humans get it, it is difficult for anyone to truly step out of it. But all this, after adding the electronic control system, was perfectly realized through these human skins that were controlled by remote control and exuded strange aura. In other words, Subai was now completely trapped in this formation. Even Subai himself smiled a little. The Frankenstein really didn't admire him at first. He had invented something that combined the East and the West. At the same time, Subai felt that the power in his body was being continuously extracted. High speed. We are currently researching a companion soul. This research has actually been on the right track for a long time. Of course, it was not done by this half-baked apprentice, but by the person you killed before. There is no shortage of anything else. What is missing is a strong enough soul. Ordinary dead souls mean nothing to me, so I have been waiting for an opportunity. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. This formation will continue to consume and torture you. When you are dying, I will extract your soul and erase your consciousness, so that you are deemed dead. Don't worry, I will not give you possessions and leave by entering the story world. A chance to get out of trouble. By the way, I forgot to tell you that the energy source of this formation is electricity. You can also pray for a power outage, but we have a backup generator at home. The little girl looked at Subai inside through the circle of human skin, her eyes filled with unabashed fanaticism. If this companion soul can really be made because of your contribution, I will be able to take a shortcut and have a life object, and I will no longer be a person of this class. Subai raised the Hellfire shotgun in his hand and pointed it at the little girl. The little girl did not dodge because she was confident that this formation was enough to withstand the attack of Sudbai's sharp weapon. Boom! The gun went off. A big hole opened in the little girl's chest, and her whole body fell to the ground like a kite with a broken string. Lying on the ground, she was not dead. She was still bleeding and twitching, with a look of disbelief on her face. Sudbai was also a little stunned. He first looked at the gun in his hand. Then he turned around. Looking behind him. Terror broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 336. The little girl fell in a pool of blood, and the blood flowed out, but because she was an audience member, her body had also experienced many times of strengthening, so she was not dead yet and could continue to hold on. However, he has obviously lost all ability to move, let alone fight back and resist. After all, facing the direct attack of the Hellfire shotgun without defense, both body and soul will inevitably suffer great damage. Around him, those Yubu formations composed of human skins were still running continuously, with a profound and mysterious aura. Fatty once told Sudbai that Yubu could achieve the wonders of heaven and earth, unless he really had that kind of talent. For people who have reached heaven, otherwise it will be really difficult for them to complete the U steps. Nowadays, whether it is Taoism or Buddhism, there are many footwork modified based on the U steps, which is just a simplified version. However, using modern technological remote control programming methods, Ubuletin was almost completely embodied in these human skins. Sudbai did not think that his Hellfire shotgun was really so powerful that it could destroy the enemy with one shot. Open this formation. The bearded young man still leaned against the door, looked at Sudbai, then at the little girl lying in a pool of blood, smiled, and said to Sudbai, "Dude, do you have any cigarettes? I smell tobacco on you." As he spoke, he took the initiative to fiddle with a bead on the bone. The human skin suddenly restrained their aura, and slowly drifted back to the bedroom where they were originally stored one by one. Sudbai took out a cigarette from his pocket and threw one to the other side. The sloppy young man took the cigarette, pinned it to his ear, and casually placed the bone that was equivalent to a remote control on the sofa in the living room. Then he seemed to want to approach the little girl but was afraid. "I'm sure she doesn't have the ability to hurt you now. She even doesn't have the ability to step on an ant now," Sudbai said beside the sloppy young man. The sloppy young man felt relieved after hearing this, squatted down next to the little girl, and stared at her carefully with a playful smile. The little girl's mouth kept dripping with blood, and her eyes were full of shock and anger. She knew that even if she couldn't beat Sudbai, she could at least bite off a piece of Sudbai's flesh before Sudbai killed her. Sudbai wouldn't feel so good, but the fact that he was shot like this easily was all thanks to his partner in front of him. "I told you, you must know how to respect me." The sloppy man followed the angry girl on the ground seriously and said, "This is what will happen if you don't respect me. In fact, my patience is also limited." "Yes, just like you." The sloppy man stood up and looked at Sudbai. "Do you feel a little confused?" Sudbai nodded, then shook his head. The sloppy man was puzzled. "Isn't it supposed to be difficult to understand? It seems like you understand it." "I understand what you are thinking," Sudbai said. "It is indeed very nerve-wracking to rebel at such an important moment for such a reason, but Sudbai can understand it, because he feels the same way, just as he often couldn't control himself to flip the table, so at that time, Sudbai didn't have many interests and calculations in his mind anymore. Some of them just followed his own heart and did whatever he wanted. Actually, it's okay. You are better than her, and you must have more resources than her. She doesn't respect me, which makes me disgusted. Therefore, I think changing an investor is a more appropriate choice." The sloppy man expressed his true inner thoughts. It was very simple and pure, leaving people speechless. A smile appeared on Sudbai's lips. "Why do you think I will cooperate with you instead of destroying this place directly? Moreover, the previous owner of this place, your owner, was killed by me myself. I actually have to thank you for this." The sloppy man shook his head indifferently. "You know, when he was here, I was not qualified to have access to those core technologies and information. For a scientific researcher, do you know how much torture it is for a person?" The sloppy man pointed to his forehead. "The terrible thirst for knowledge, the unsolvable thirst for knowledge. Even though such a magical and exciting thing is right in front of me, I can't touch it. This is really a kind of torture, which makes me feel tired all day long." She was tortured at night, so when I was in the next room preparing to open the formation and listening to you talking, I was really happy to hear her say that you killed my former master, and I almost couldn't help but come out in front of you. A kiss. Subai looked at the sloppy man's appearance and couldn't help but twitching the corner of his mouth. "As for the other things, feel free. What I can say is, give me some time to digest those technologies. Whatever products my former master can make, I will be the same, and many of his things are actually my hard work and inspiration. I believe I can do better than him. At least for now, I have the ability to mass produce the potions in your bag, of course, provided that you give me the resources I need." Subai didn't answer in a hurry, just pointed to the person lying on the ground. "What is the companion soul she mentioned before?" "It's a technology, it's already mature. The thing she longed for before, theoretically speaking, requires a soul that is powerful and solidified to a certain extent, erases all impurities, and then implants it into your own body. You will have a spare soul. Of course, since it is a spare tire, the effect is definitely not as good as the original, and it can only be used as a container to store soul power. It cannot have more functions, just like you have an extra sperm vesicle. Can store a lot more." Subai touched his chin. "In this way, those guys who have integrated their natal weapons actually have the same purpose. By integrating their natal weapons into themselves, the opportunity of the body is equivalent to having another soul in one's body, allowing one's strength to achieve a cross-level breakthrough. The principle is the same, that is, forcing quantitative changes to cause qualitative changes. This method of accompanying souls is definitely not as effective as the traditional or orthodox method of fusing natal weapons, but it can indeed achieve the same effect. Just imagine, if this little girl had a companion soul before, her power of thought would be increased by 60 to 80%. And this improvement is not just as simple as calculating the same amount of combat power. It is estimated that the activation effect of her willpower can be increased by 2 to 3 times. After all, skills that could not be used before can also be used, and magic weapons that could not be activated before can also be used. If it can be activated, the combat power will naturally be greatly increased. In that case, it will be really difficult for Subai to suppress this little girl like before. It is just luck that he is not suppressed by the other party. So, you guys should be the same type of people, right? Hee. Don't worry, I'm not interested in your identity, and I don't dare to be interested. I know my former master. He is secretly investigating her identity, and he has almost obtained it. When I made breakthroughs and made substantial discoveries, I met you inexplicably and was killed by you. You should be an organization. Everything about your organization is strictly confidential. I know how to behave and will not seek death. All I want is to have enough resources and support to continue this research. The previous death of Frankenstein, now it seems, should indeed be due to this reason. He was investigating a terrorist broadcast, so the terrorist broadcast triggered him to a real-life mission. Subai and the black man went to find the boy in red, and Frankenstein also died in the end. However, it is indeed a bit unexpected that black listeners also fell there. Maybe even the horror broadcast did not expect it? I'm not very keen on companion souls, Subai said. Either don't want it, or want the best one. Subai doesn't want to get a companion soul and install a defective one for himself, but I am very interested in this research. You can continue to study it if you don't use it yourself. you can also use it for others in the future as a kind of benefit exchange. Well, aren't the raw materials here? What she wanted before was your soul, and you can use her soul now. By the way, do you have the ability to extract souls? The sloppy man made a gesture of pouring water. Subai shook his head, that's not what I'm good at. Indeed, in terms of souls, although Subai himself was very strong due to some adventures, he really didn't know much about how to manipulate and extract souls. This kind of work was best done by the fat monk. That's okay, she doesn't understand either, but my former master has a device that can be used just for this. But if you don't plan to use it now, we have to find a way to preserve and collect her soul first. With that said, the sloppy man walked back to the laboratory, and then quickly lifted a box out of it. He opened the box next to the little girl and began to install the equipment. This equipment looked like it was used in a slaughterhouse, but there were many the high-end stuff made Subai feel a little confused for a while. Maybe it was due to his specialization in the art. The sloppy man put a hood on the little girl's head. The rise and fall of the little girl's chest became more and more obvious, and a look of pleading appeared on her face. But the sloppy man didn't care at all, and it was naturally impossible for Subai to feel any compassion at this time. After getting ready, the sloppy man brought an empty fish tank like a large bowl from the living room and poured some blue liquid into it. This is culture fluid. You can buy it in the market for just money. After saying that, the sloppy man pressed the button. Buzz buzz. The machine starts to operate. Click. The little girl's head was opened, and then the white things were taken out. Then, the sloppy man put those things into the fish tank one by one. At this time, in the fish tank filled with culture fluid, a human brain floats in it. If ordinary people can't bear to do this, they won't be able to maintain brain activity at all, but you are not ordinary people, so you can do this, the sloppy man said to himself very proudly. He was completely unaware of Subai's sudden frown after seeing this idiot.